This ain't Tuesday and this ain't Wednesday. Tuesday's worship won't cut it on Sunday. Wednesday's praise won't get it on Sunday. Tired? Tired? Tired of the devil kicking our butts. That fool done broke loose.
God bless you. Greetings. My name is Mario Sims. I'm senior pastor of Doulos Chapel. Doulos Chapel is a non-denominational Christian church located at 608 South St. Joseph Street in South Bend, Indiana. As many of you know, I have been an activist in the city of South Bend for over 30 years. Beginning in the late 80s, I was a member, in fact, the board chairman of the Urban League in St. Joe County in 1992, and also was the interim executive director. So I have both experience as a civil rights activist and operating an actual civil rights organization. I also sat on the executive committee for the NAACP here locally. And since the year 2013, when my wife and I bought Doulos Chapel, I have been a pastor for over 11 years. I got saved over 30 years ago in 1994, and as God began working in my life, I realized the work that I was doing before as a civil rights activist needed to be elevated to become an advocate of justice as Christ required and demanded all of us to. I want to start by reading out of the book of Habakkuk, which is one of the minor prophets. Habakkuk chapter 1, 3-4 reads in this way. Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict abound. Therefore the law is paralyzed and justice never prevails. The wicked hem in the righteous so that justice is perverted. Now, the reason I mention my background in civil rights is I'm not new to battling wicked people. What has happened since I was saved, though, in 1994, God has given me an understanding of who He is. And it's important to understand that the Bible tells us that justice is rooted in the very nature of God, who rewards good and punishes evil impartially. But more importantly, what we're going to look in today is the Bible also commands God's people to give justice to the weak, the fatherless, the afflicted, the destitute, and the sojourner in the New Testament. And a love of justice is a virtue for those of us who are believers. And I want to stress that this message today is really towards believers. And the reason is believers are supposed to be in our new birth created, dying to self and created in the image of Christ. Well, if you're in the image of Christ, you should also reflect Christ's character and certainly have an understanding of the Bible. So I'm really grieved about what's going on here in South Bend. There are things, obviously, I saw over 30 years ago as a civil rights activist when I sought civil justice for people. Now, as a Christian pastor, my responsibility is to speak the Word of God and not address so-called civil rights, because God doesn't recognize rights. What God recognizes is truth, justice, and He also clearly identifies what evil is. So going from a civil rights activist to a Christian pastor really is a higher calling, and not seeking the enforcement of the Constitution and equal rights and those type of things. What we're looking for as Christians should be to follow His commands, to love Him, because He said, if you love me, you'll keep His commands. And one of His commands is to do justice. I am really appalled, and there are several situations I'm going to talk about today as examples. I want you to think in terms of this program is about Christians and their responsibility to fight against corruption. Unfortunately here, many Christian pastors, or so-called Christian pastors, and many members of congregations, and even members of elected office, the mayor, who is supposed to be a Christian, all 9 city council people who are supposed to be Christians, our county council, they have, in essence, not held up to the standards required of Jesus Christ. And they've allowed justice to be perverted. Now, I can prove that justice is perverted here. I can prove to you that elected officials who Romans 13 say should be God's servants are in fact failing to be ministers of justice, and they failed in what Christ requires, which is to us to walk in his image, to also have the character of Christ. I'm going to zero in on 4 situations to let you know how Christianity has failed our Lord and has failed the people here. What you were seeing here is a perversion. These words may seem harsh, but they're truth, and we are truth speakers, and I can document the facts with that support what I'm saying. The first thing I want to look at is the Motels for Now program, which is operated by Sheila McCarthy. Many of you may or may not know that Sheila initially owned a house next to our church. And one day we were having a meeting at the church. It was Pastor Graylin Watson and Reverend Kenneth Lee, who was not a city councilman at that time. Reverend Graylin Watson had brought Kenneth Lee to me so we could make introduction to each other. As our meeting was concluding, we heard loud shouting, and which proceeded from the yard of which was coming from the yard of the church. We were ending our meeting, so we stepped outside to find a couple who I had allowed them to place their tent on church property on the south side of the church, who were extremely upset because Sheila McCarthy and her helper was standing outside, and they had acknowledged that Sheila and her helper had thrown several buckets of urine and poop on the property of David and Tanya. And this was witnessed by myself, it was witnessed by Reverend Kenneth Lee, and it was witnessed by Pastor Graylin Watson. Eventually, ABC 57 came out and did a news story. Now, for years, Sheila denied that this happened. In fact, when she became the executive director of the Motels for Now program, now keep in mind the Motels for Now program has been funded with millions of dollars of your tax money. In fact, not only did the city and the county council, the mayor and the county council give her money to buy a motel, which is out on Lincoln Way, just past Bendix. They also gave her money to pay her staff to operate this motel. And the whole thought of this motel was to provide low barrier housing. Well, it's been disastrous. So first you would give millions of taxpayer dollars to a woman who to house the homeless, who toss buckets of pee and poop on the property, a tent of a homeless couple on church property. This lady has a postgraduate degree in religion from Notre Dame, claims to be a Christian, but she does. Not only did she throw the pee and poop, which is witnessed and documented, but then she lied on me, saying that it never happened. In fact, I stood in opposition to her receiving the money when the county council voted on it, and her and her supporters, which were from the Catholic Workers Group, began loudly calling me a liar, when in fact it was true. It had been witnessed. More distressing is when the funding came up for a vote in front of the city council, Reverend Kenneth Lee, who was there that day, agreed to give her millions of dollars of money, even though he knew that he had witnessed her throwing pee and poop. He was there that day on David and Tanya Herman's property. So here you have a woman who has advanced degree, postgraduate degree in religion, throwing fecal matter and human pee on the property of a homeless couple, David and Tanya Herman, a married couple, then lying about it. Then you have the city and county council, without question, giving her $1 million during a time that Reverend Kenneth Lee was sitting on the council, did not say one word about what he had witnessed that day. And so you have a situation now that this Motels for Now has been operating now for a couple years and has had over 1,000 police runs. And there's a recent article that over 24 of the people who were involved in this program have died, either from drug overdoses or other issues like that. So what's a Christian to do with corruption? Certainly, you should not be involved in corruption, but you're seeing how Sheila McCarthy is perverting justice. And this is something that Jesus always warned about with the Pharisees, and certainly she could be called a Pharisee or a teacher of the law with her advanced degree. But this was allowed by a city council, all 9 members and a mayor, all who claim to be Christians. Think about that. And you have a Christian pastor, Reverend Kenneth Lee, that voted to give her money and did not call her out on her hypocrisy. These were criminal acts of throwing human waste on the property of people. There was a police report that was filed that was never followed up on, apparently. She's never been charged. Imagine if you had done something like that. You would have been charged. But that's just one example of ministers of justice not doing their job and not operating in the character and the image of Christ. So we have Motels for Now as an example. And in fact, we can move on to, that's one example of how Christians have failed the Lord. They failed the people here, but they failed the Lord. The second situation is just as blatant as a situation with Sheila McCarthy, and that's Sharon McBride, who is the president of the South Bend City Council, who on March 12th, and you need to look at this article that was aired by WSBT, that's March 12th, she was fired for malfeasance in her day job at Ducombe Center. She had made her mom one of the top paid officials in the county for a clerk's job, and also supposedly as a security guard at Ducombe Center. But the reality is that it proved out that her mom had made over 6 figures by inflating her responsibilities, which Sharon signed off about. If you go to the WSBT article on March 12th, you will see what I think is extremely disturbing. Behind Sharon McBride is a number of pastors and ministers who support her. Now, this woman was fired from Ducombe Center for malfeasance, for stealing money, and a lot of other things. Not only is she still a member of the city council, apparently they don't have morality clauses or ethical clauses, even though they're all Christians, but apparently they don't read the Bible that requires in Romans 13 elected officials who are anointed and appointed by God to be ministers of justice. How can corruption and Christianity coexist is what I'm saying to you. Sharon McBride was fired for malfeasance, and at the commissioner's hearing, in which she was called into account, there were a number of pastors there disrupting the meeting in support of her. Now, I want you to think about this. Think about what I said, and if you have time, go and look at March 12th, the WSBT article that aired. It was posted on the internet at 4:16 p.m. by WSBT, and you'll see clearly the pictures of all the pastors. It's shameful. These are supposed to be men of God that are standing behind, instead of calling out wickedness, they're standing behind someone who is wicked. And my wife and I knew Sharon McBride. Before we opened Doulos Chapel, we attended the church where she's a choir leader at, which is Second Baptist Church. But yet there was her pastor and all these other pastors standing behind her, supporting her in her wickedness. Now, I want you to think about that when I go to this next story, which is extremely tragic. It's a story of a young man by the name of Jihad Vasquez. Jihad Vasquez was a 16-year-old Penn High student who one day went to school Another student accused him of taking this other student's iPad when in fact it was Jihad's iPad. The other student began fighting with Jihad. The fight was broken up. Jihad's mom was summoned to the school and about the fight. He was suspended for 4 days. And Jihad's mom, Stephanie Jones, was specifically told by the administrators of Penn High School, do not let your son take public transportation or the school bus. Later that afternoon, after Stephanie Jones, Jihad's mom, had taken him home, Jihad wanted to go to a friend's house that was also a fellow student. And his mom felt, well, this will cheer him up. He didn't do anything wrong. And so she let him go over a friend's house. And I want to make sure you understand this. What happened before they left Penn High School, this administrator told Stephanie Jones, do not allow Jihad to ride public transportation or the school bus, which was strange. Well, Jihad goes over a friend's house, and sometime that evening, the young man that Jihad had gotten a fight with came to the friend's house, took Jihad away, and Jihad was not seen. This was Monday, was not seen until he was found Thursday after 1 o'clock, hanging from an electrical tower. Now, we have pictures of the scene, and in fact, I've been out there several times, and it shows Jihad hanging from a piece of sheet, but his feet are on the ground, and his knees are bent, so he couldn't have died in this way, hanging, because he could support himself. The dirt around where his feet were was undisturbed, so certainly he was killed someplace else and taken there. What's so instructive about this is the police were called, the St. Joe County Sheriff's Department arrived, the officer took a report, closed the report within a half an hour, never contacted any of the students at Penn High that could have gave him additional information about how this happened. And in less than 48 hours, which is against state statute, unless a health officer determines for religious reasons, they could be cremated. A person could be cremated within that time. Jihad was cremated the next day. He was found on Thursday, approximately 1:30. He was cremated the next day. His mom was told that if she wanted an autopsy, that she would have to pay for the autopsy, which is ridiculous, and I'll give you more on that in a minute. The funeral home was chosen for her. She received a cursory, perfunctory viewing of the body. The body was in a body bag. It was unzipped slightly so she can obviously identify her son. She wasn't allowed to take any of his clothes. Of course, there was never an autopsy. But more interesting, the Sheriff's Department never spoke to any of the students, and they've called us. They've called and said, hey, we have information. And not only that, at the funeral, the national head of the KKK attended the funeral uninvited. What do you think about that? How many times have you heard someone in the KKK attending the funeral of a young black youth that had been hung? Well, this is during the time that Tim Corbett headed Metro Homicide, and Sheriff Greg Gurk was the sheriff. There was literally no investigation done. And there have been several news articles that have been done one by the Young Turks, which is a premier national investigative reporting organization. And you could go online, you could go to YouTube and look up this story. Jihad Vasquez, Jihad, Vasquez, Vasquez, that's Vasquez. I've done stories on it myself. The Young Turks have done stories on it, calling into question the hanging of this man and a refusal locally. At one point, Stephanie met with former police officer Lynn Coleman, and Lynn Coleman tried to discourage her. He told her, leave it alone, you're crazy. and what they said happened. This is, of course, the same Lynn Coleman that has recently participated in creating some sort of fund for the father of the children that were killed in the fire, but yet refuses to fully cooperate with the father in providing the funds. That's thoroughly corrupt, but Lynn Coleman calls himself a Christian. You see the common thread here? The city council, the county council, and the mayor, when dealing with Sheila McCarthy, calls themselves Christians, but gives millions to someone who threw pee and poop on a homeless couple to house homeless people. And this is the same lady who graduated from Notre Dame with a postgraduate degree. You could look at the ABC 57 article about this story about human waste being thrown, and that article is still up. Also, there's been recent articles about motels for now, where Real News Indiana and some of the other investigative outlets have reported that Sheila, when confronted finally after years of lying and said it didn't happen and calling me a liar, essentially slandering me, she now was forced to admit when David and Tanya were going to appear, David and Tanya Herman, the homeless couple she'd thrown the pee and poop on, were going to appear at a public meeting and said she did it. Well, what she did was admitted in an email that I have that it was done, but she said it wasn't her, it was her helper, it was done accidentally. That's not the truth. Wayne Hubbard was there that day, took a video, which I don't know what Wayne is at on this, but he won't even respond to phone calls. I don't know what happened with Wayne, but the reality is we have eyewitnesses that saw Sheila smirking and saying that I did it. I threw the pee and poop out. So when she was confronted with this years after calling me a liar and slandering me and said, well, Pastor Mario's just doing this because the city doesn't work with him. Well, I don't want the city to work with me because I teach Jesus, and the city will not obviously allow the work of Christ to proceed, in city government. So what is the Christian response to corruption? It is lined out in the Bible. It is set out clearly for you. We are to not only stand against it, but oppose it and speak truth to power. If you remember, there was John the Baptist who spoke to leadership. It is our responsibility to be like John the Baptist, to be like Jesus, to be like Peter and Paul, who when summoned before the leadership spoke truth to power and told them that what you're doing is wrong. Yet the city council, the mayor, and the county council have all gone along with the corruption, and apparently because it benefits them financially. Those pastors that stood behind Sharon McBride in that article that you can see on March 12th that WSBT put up are standing there knowing that this woman is guilty of malfeasance. Some of them work for her as a security guard. So they had a personal profit interest over the clear commands of God to be obedient as to justice. The thing with Jihad Vasquez, I want to kind of even go a little bit deeper. There was a public forum on down ballot elections dated 3/23/24. It was recorded by the American Democracy Project of IU South Bend, and it's dated 3/23/24. If you go to their website, again, American Democracy Project of IU South Bend, there's a video of the public forum on down ballot elections dated 3/23/24. If you go to that video, part one, and you begin at 36 minutes and 55 seconds, and it'll go about 11 minutes, from 36 minutes and 55 seconds to 47 minutes and 18 seconds, you will see me speaking. And you will see, and what it was I had gone there to support Mike McGahn in running for re-election or return to his office. And as it turned out, they had the current person that's serving as coroner and Mike McGahn on the Diaz. And the current coroner had downplayed the investigative responsibilities of the coroner's office. And I didn't come, and I say this, if you look at that tape, beginning at 36 minutes and 55 seconds, I didn't come there to speak. I just came there to sit in support of Mike McGann. But what happened when the current coroner said that the investigative responsibilities of the coroner were not that great, that the medical responsibilities were great. And so it provoked me to stand up, because behind me was Stephanie Jones, the mother of Jihad Vasquez, the 16-year-old Penn High School student that had been hung by the KKK. And that was in 2011. Here we are 13 years later, and there's been no meaningful investigation. So I stood up and raised my hand, and I said, I have a concern here when you downplay the investigative responsibilities of the coroner. And incidentally, I don't know if you know or not, the coroner is the highest ranking law enforcement official in the county by statute and has the authority to arrest the sheriff. Well, nothing had been done for 13 years since 2011, and I gave the whole story, and I said, if the coroner had properly overseen the investigation, someone would have been charged in hanging Jihad. It's clear that the KKK hung Jihad. Mike McGann, and I really respect him so much, because what he did was take about 3 or 4 minutes and explain what he did when he got into office. He wasn't in office during the time that Jihad had been hung, but he explained that he had little to work with. He talked to Stephanie Jones, Jihad's mom. He met with Bill Redmond to try and get Bill Redmond to open an investigation. Bill Redmond said he wouldn't open an investigation. He also indicated that the investigation should have been conducted by the sheriff at the time, during the time that Jihad was hung, which was Gres Gorick, or by Metro Homicide Tim Corbett. And that was not done. Again, look that up. You can find, and so I'm documenting. You don't have to take my word for it. You could go to the ABC 57 story about Sheila McCarthy dumping human waste on David and Tanya Herman's property, which was their tent, from the window of her house. Now, she sold that house, and I don't want the lady that's in that house harmed in any way. Sheila McCarthy doesn't live there, but Sheila at the time lived there, and you could see the poo and pee on the ledge of the second floor window. They knew that there was the property of the homeless. Does it make sense to you that this Christian who has a PhD in theology would throw human waste on the property of David and Tanya Herman, clearly knowing it was the property of a homeless couple, and then being given millions of dollars by the mayor, the city council, the county council, all who profess Christ, to house the homeless? Well, if you go to that hotel that Sheila was allowed to buy, can you imagine going to the city council and say, hey, I want to house the homeless. I don't have any money, but will you give me $1 million to buy a motel, and would you pay me a staff? Well, we housed over 200 people from 2013 in Doulos Chapel up until the time that we stopped housing, when the city turned our water off because we refused to pay taxes. We were tax exempt, which they knew, and we told them, yet they continued to charge us taxes. David Horvath said, provide me the state tax revenue or the state tax information that shows that you're tax exempt. We provided him our 501c3. We provided him our state tax exemption. We also got the form ST-109 and gave it to him. They continued to tax us for 5 years, and we went along with it and paid it for 5 years. And then after the 5th year, I just said, I'm not going to do this anymore. You're not going to charge University of Notre Dame or any other church, any Catholic church taxes who are taxed. Why are you doing this to us? We went to our then councilman, Henry Davis, who made a weak attempt to approach David Horvath and ultimately told me, just go ahead and pay the tax. I refused to. So we didn't pay the tax for 2 years. It accumulated up until December of 2022 when they threatened to turn our water off. We met with, at that time, we met with the at-large city council woman who came to the church and said, let me have some time and let me figure out what we can do. I said, well, what you should know is this, okay? I was a corporate credit manager in my earlier life, and this debt was charged off, or the city should charge it off. You generated the debt. You kept charging us knowing that we were tax exempt. You knew that I was refusing to pay Caesar what wasn't Caesar. And that's so WNDU did a story about, the church arguing about the taxes. You had people saying, well, render to Caesar. Caesar doesn't require a non-for-profit to pay taxes. We are tax exempt, just like Notre Dame, just like the Catholic churches. They don't have this problem. The only reason we have the problem is because I speak truth to power, and we've never got one penny from the city. We have never depended on the city because I preach Jesus. So to give this woman, Sheila McCarthy, millions after she dumped pee and poop on a homeless couple and then lied about me telling the truth, only to finally admit when she was going to be outed publicly about this by the couple that she did it, and to continue to give it. Now they want to expand the program, the Motels for Now program, to just north of where the school corporation parks its buses, down the street from a daycare facility, across the street from homes and apartments. And here's the thing. It's already, if you drive west of Lincoln Way, west of Bendix, down Lincoln Way, between Bendix and the airport, you'll see how the Motels for Now program has destroyed that neighborhood. McDonald's has closed down. How do you close a McDonald's down? And I used to know the manager of that McDonald's, Sue, and so people say it was always hard. No, it was a flourishing McDonald's. It was closed because people were tired of, the McDonald's ownership were tired of these people coming in, drinking Cokes, just begging from the customers. The other businesses have complained. There have been over 1,000 emergency runs, police and medical runs there. There have been overdoses and violence there, all operated by a so-called Christian. That's corruption. It's corruption. And so we deal with the Sheila McCarthy situation, so-called Christian. What's corruption got to do with Christianity? You deal with Sharon McBride, who stole taxpayer money, but yet standing behind her are local pastors, protesting the commissioners who want to fire her for malfeasance, which she ultimately was fired from. But then you have the same Christians, the mayor, city council, who agreed to shut the water off in our church, and it's still off. Now, we've had people, supporters, wealthy supporters, who could write a check and pay what the water bill is. I've refused to let them do it because I'm not going to render to Caesar what is not Caesar's. If they force me to do it, they'll force your church to do it. But it hasn't stopped us. Instead of having Sunday services at the church, when a few would show up, we have Sunday service at my home. We call it Doulos Chapel Home Church. You can find it on my Facebook page or on YouTube, on the Doulos Chapel. We have 100 times more people watching our service than ever did. What I love in Genesis 50:19, what Joseph said, to his brothers, what you intended for evil, God intended for good, because what the city intended for evil, God used to get the word out. And by the way, God said, you proved that you can house. We've housed over 200 people in the church without a dime from the city, without having 1,000 police runs. In fact, I think we had less than 40 police runs during the 11 years that we were housing in the church. And it wasn't low barrier. We had rules: 0 tolerance to violence, 0 tolerance to drug use. If you had sex in the church, and if you weren't married, you were gone, because we did house families. So you can do housing that's not low barrier. Obviously, you cannot allow people to live on the taxpayer's dime and continue to use whatever money they get from either a disability or Social Security or a hustle and continue to get high and expect them to be rehabilitated. That's what Sheila McCarthy does. That's why you have over 1,000 police runs. This is a Christian. God requires us. You know, the Apostle Paul said, such were many of you. You cannot continue in your sin and be a Christian. You cannot have a Christian housing program and allow people to continue to sin. You just can't do it. That's not Christianity. If you remember what Jesus told the Nicodemus, he told him, you must be born again, which means we once were something, but we're no longer. This is ridiculous. I mean, so we looked at Sharon McBride. We looked at Sheila McCarthy. We looked at the situation with Jihad Vasquez, a young man that was hung by the KKK and ignored by all leaders at every level, the city council, the county council. Stephanie Jones even went to then Mayor Pete Buttigieg and told him what was going on. He promised to get back to her and never did. I want to move on to another situation, and that's the situation with the South Bend police tapes. The South Bend police tapes, if you remember, also happened around 2012. A situation with Jihad occurred in 2011. You know about the South Bend police tapes. But I mean, what you also know is it's been 11 years and they haven't been played. Now, I was blessed with the opportunity to have the former Director of Communications for the South Bend Police Department, who's the only person that heard all the tapes. And I say that because there's several YouTube videos of the then commander of Metro Homicide saying there's nothing on the tapes. How does he know? Because he didn't hear all the tapes. He was just lying about the tapes. There are only 6 tapes that are the subject of the tape battle, whether they're played or not, when Mrs. DePape heard all the tapes as part of her job. And the reality is, if you go to YouTube, you can look at the interview that she did. It's about an hour interview she did on WUBS that I was able to have her do. And she tells you about the unethical criminal things she heard that were on the tapes. Yet, Christian city attorneys, a Christian prosecutor, a Christian city council, and Christian judges who've said in this case won't release the tapes. Police officers are out of their minds for the reason that they all tell me that when you get a job with the city, you sign a paperwork indicating that you are aware that when you use city telephonic or communications equipment, you have no right to privacy, which means the defense that they've used to withhold planted tapes, well, we have a right to privacy. No, you don't. It's a lie, but it's a lie that's been allowed because you have Christians in judges' seats, in the city attorney. You had 2 city attorneys, Stephanie Still and Crystal Briscoe, who, doing discovery of the lawsuit that Mrs. DePape had filed, asked Mrs. DePape several, I think it was between 10 and 15 questions about what was on the tapes, and she told them. She told the city attorneys, they are attorneys. They have a responsibility if illegality as an attorney, as their oath of office to disclose that. They kept their mouths shut. Both was promoted to St. Joe County Superior Judge by the governor of Indiana, okay, who's supposed to be a Christian. And now one of them has a lifetime appointment, Crystal Briscoe, to the federal bench, which she was nominated for. I'm embarrassed by Marine Corps Captain Todd Young, who's a senator. And I alerted his office that they had heard what was on the tapes and violated their oath as an attorney by not publicly disclosing the crimes that Mrs. DePape had made them aware of. Christianity here is a mockery, but all the elected officials claim to be Christians. Christianity and corruption cannot exist. Read the Bible. You know, then you have a case that's personal to me. In April of 2019, a reporter who was formerly here but is now in Fort Wayne, called me and asked me, was I at the church? It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I said, yes, I was at the church. So her, another reporter, and a cameraman came. And so she told me, just wait, I don't want to talk until we get you set up. They set the camera up in my office. The reporter put on the microphone, and she said, Mario, I just left Tim Corbett, and he told me, he bragged to me that he had planted evidence to gain your wrongful conviction. And how do you feel about that? I was stunned. I knew that the truth of, I've been trying to prove ever since 1994 that I'd been set up and the evidence had been planted. And if you go to the making of the conviction of Mario Sims, you'll see where they used jailhouse snitches. Well, all that was Tim Corbett. They'd planted evidence. John Marnoka, who just retired, was fully aware that, because there were 3 guys that initially I was placed in a jail cell with, that were going to testify against me as jailhouse snitches. The other 2 said, hey, we're not going to do that. And we told Marnoka that we're not going to do it. And Tim Corbett has put us up to it. So the only one that in fact did jailhouse snitch, that did test-a-lie, is what they called it, when you testifying knowingly lying, was Lionel Williams. And he lied that I'd confessed to him. And that was all set up by Tim Corbett. And evidence was planted, so forth and so on. Well, I tried, but the courts in Indiana are very wicked, and they're under the control. Mike Barnes was placed in the Court of Appeals by then Governor Joe Kernan. Well, I ran against Joe Kernan for mayor in 1994, and when I announced it, that's when I was arrested and charged with sexually assaulting my then wife, whose interest was simply to get child custody in a divorce proceeding, and told me that they had told her just to do it and then she'd be able to drop the charges. All they needed was to sully my image so I couldn't succeed against Joe Kernan. Well, then they threatened her when she tried to drop the charges with false informing and locking her up. Bottom line, for 30 years I tried to prove my innocence, and then Alexis Shear Gray came to my office that day with another reporter and videotaped this. We have it on video, and saying that she just left Tim Corbett. Now, people wonder, well, why would Tim Corbett do that? Well, what she told me was, Mario, for years I believed Tim Corbett when he told me about you. I believe you'd sexually assault his wife. I didn't see any reason why Tim Corbett would lie. So he felt so comfortable with her that he felt he could brag to her. And he bragged to her, yeah, I set him up, I planted the evidence. Well, she came, she recorded the story. She also contacted former president of the city council and current commissioner and former South Bend police officer, Derek Dieter. And Derek said he almost wrecked his truck when she called him and told him what Tim Corbett had told her, that he had planted evidence in my case. She also called Pat Cottrell, who was a former South Bend police officer and president of the Board of Public Safety, very credible people, that Tim Corbett had told her that he had planted evidence and also to gain my wrongful conviction. She filed a police report with Elkhart police officer Davin Hackett, who was a former South Bend police officer, who she had known when he was South Bend police officer and trusted him. And he notified Internal Affairs, as he was told to do by his lieutenant, and no police investigation ever came out of that. And also Jesse Davis, a fellow activist. I've known Jesse for over 30 years, and Jesse Davis will confirm that. So she told Derek Dieter, Jesse Davis, Pat Cottrell, file a police report with Davin Hackett. Well, we filed a lawsuit, and since 2019, we've been fighting this lawsuit. Initially, it was heard before Judge John Broughton, in which, if you know, and I didn't know at the time, John Broughton was not only the former president of the St. Joe County Democratic Party, all the people we sued, Tim Corbett, Stephanie Steele, Crystal Briscoe, on and on and on, were Democrats, so there's a conflict of interest there. And when we filed our lawsuit, it was John Broughton. Tim Corbett, none of the defendants in the lawsuit ever denied the allegations that Tim Corbett had told the reporter this. That's very important. Under Trial Rule 8, Indiana Trial Rule 8, it's called deemed admitted. If you don't deny, if someone says you're a liar and you never say anything, then in fact you're a liar. Well, the facts were deemed admitted. The Court of Appeal, we filed a motion for default because they hadn't appeared. John Broden denied it. We went to the Court of Appeals, where Mike Barnes was at the time, and Mike Barnes was involved in denying it. We transferred it to the Indiana Supreme Court. They never addressed the issue of the evidence planning. We then applied for a writ of certiorari in the United States Supreme Court. Well, you know, out of Notre Dame, you have a recent appointee up there, so you have that St. Joe County thread, and the United States Supreme Court reviewed it for 60 days and then decided not to grant cert. How do you show beyond a doubt, and we proved beyond a doubt, Tim Corbett, a law enforcement officer, admitted to planting evidence? And then after Alexis Shear Gray, the reporter, went public, she called me and said she has to leave Indiana. She was living in Fort Wayne then, because Tim Corbett threatened her life. You have a reporter that reported a story of a law enforcement officer here planting evidence to gain a conviction. No court in the United States will touch it, along with the fact that not only did he plant evidence, he also threatened the reporter's life. You call a reporter and threaten her life and see how quickly you end up in jail. He never was jailed. In fact, he's a badge-carrying police officer in Mishawaka now, Tim Corbett. This is supposed to be a city and a county where the county council and the city council and the mayor and the elected prosecutor, Ken Cotter, are supposed to be Christians. The Indiana Appeals Court and the Supreme Court, the judges, if you look at their resumes, they all claim to be Christians. You go to the United States Supreme Court, all of the justices are Christians. Yet, the Christian judges have allowed a law enforcement officer, it's not even a dispute, to plant evidence and then threaten to kill the reporter. She has to move. She moved out of state. She lives in California now. More importantly, after that, Tim Corbett had the nerve to sue me for defamation, even though he never denied it. That case ended up in front of John Broden until they had a secret hearing where they appointed a judge in January. Look at the record. Look at Corbett versus Sims. They appointed an attorney that has never signed an agreement with me to represent me. Initially, a year ago, we had brought him into the case, but then he had indicated he had a conflict of interest and he had to withdraw in October, yet he appears at a hearing on January 2nd in Corbett versus Sims, Richard Bryan. It's a hearing that we can't even get the transcript from. We've been trying to get a transcript from, where what happened was Judge Broden, this Richard Bryan, and Stephanie Nemeth, who's an attorney who works for the very connected Pete Augustino, who always likes to claim that he's a Christian but has done some incredibly wicked stuff in Corbett versus Sims, that all you gotta do is look at the record. Well, we've now proven, that Corbett, again, has never denied the allegation that he planted evidence in my case, never denied it in this suit, never denied that he threatened Alexis Shear's life. And then we were able to get John Broden off the case when we finally were able to file documents showing you hold the hearing with an attorney, Richard Bryan representative, that was supposed to have drawn from our case 3 months before the hearing was held. We tried to get a copy of the record. The court reporter refuses to give us a record. Richard Bryan came out of the hearing and never told us what happened during the hearing. And then Stephanie Nemeth, who represented Tim Corbett, sends us an email saying that the judges told us, determined at that hearing, that they can do discovery and we can't do discovery. Well, then we filed a motion to correct errors, and she says in the court filing, don't look at my email. So anyway, John Broughton got off the case. That was almost 90 days ago. Pending before the court is a motion to correct errors showing Richard Bryan had no authority to represent us and didn't tell us what happened after the hearing. The court reporter won't give us the record. Stephanie Nemeth either lied on the judge or is lying about what happened at the hearing. John Broughton has withdrawn, and for 90 days we've been waiting to proceed so we can get this matter resolved, because they've admitted that Corbett planted evidence and threatened a reporter's life and have gone beyond with this Richard Bryan, John Broughton, and Stephanie Nemeth involved in a conspiracy to deny us access to the court. And we haven't been able to get a judge, and we've asked for judges to be appointed in LaPorte County, and Pete Augustino's lawyer, staff member, or employee, Stephanie Nemeth, has said, no, we want a judge in St. Joe County. No St. Joe County judge in their right mind would touch this case. It's filled with corruption. But here we are. All of this involves Christians. John Broughton is a member of one of the Catholic parishes, hold himself up as a Christian. Wickedness, wicked decisions. Christians and corruption. That you shouldn't even mention a Christian in the same sentence as the word corruption. But justice is perverted here. And it's not perverted by one person. You have a prosecutor who was Tim Corbett's direct supervisor when he had Metro Homicide. He refuses to acknowledge. Other jurisdictions have conviction integrity groups, not St. Joe County. Here's the problem that you have with the tapes and with Corbett versus Sims. My case proves the truth of what's on the tapes, where, again, there's bragging about setting up, planning evidence and setting up people. Well, the elected officials, the prosecutor, the mayor, the city council, and the county council, and the judges here do not want that truth to come to the light of day. Now, the South Bend Tribune will report on corruption and wrongful convictions in Elkhart County, but not here. We even contacted the Notre Dame Innocence Project. You know, Notre Dame, the Catholic Church institution. I think Elliot Slosser is his name. And my attorney spoke to him and gave him this information about these allegations. He told my attorney a year ago, I'll call you back, I'm in a trial, and never called him back. There's a culture of corruption here, not a culture of Christianity. You should, if you're a Christian, you should be concerned. If you're a worldly person, you can be concerned. Do you know how many times I've had citizens call me, because I used to be a paralegal. My wife and I operated a paralegal support firm for a number of attorneys, and they call me and say, you know, could you recommend an attorney, because no attorney will represent us against the city? Think about that. No private attorney. If you have a lawsuit against the city, no private attorney is going to represent you in that lawsuit against the mayor, the city of South Bend, the South Bend City Council, the county council, any of the departments. They won't do it. Think about that. Attorneys won't do it. Why? Because they'll be punished. They don't want to lose revenue. So think about this. I've given you 5 examples, Motel for Now. The Sharon McBride fiasco with her being fired from Duke Center for malfeasance. The situation with Giat Vasquez, the 16-year-old Penn High School student, that was hung by the Klan. hung by the Klan. Statute was violated. No investigation was conducted beyond 30 minutes. No one will reopen a case, even though this violates federal law. The South Bend police tapes and the situation with Corbett versus Sims. I've given you documentation. I've given you videos. This is the truth. Remember, as Christians, we are truth speakers. Why aren't you? Why isn't your church? Why isn't your pastor speaking the truth? I've come full circle to simply ask you, if you're a Christian, why aren't you demanding justice in these situations? It affects you. It affects your sons and daughters. In fact, you could have somebody that's been wrongly convicted, and the truth of how they were set up is being buried by the same people who are showing up in court, supporting Sharon McBride, backing her malfeasance in criminality, and being a thief and a crook. You know, sometimes I run into some of these pastors that I've known, and they'll look at me and they'll say, you know, you don't hang with us. You know, why would I hang with you? You don't. Jesus is not there. You're not going to stand up. There are people in your congregation that need to have you speak truth to power. Corruption is rampant here. Taxpayer money is swung to those who are connected. There's nepotism that's rampant. There are violations of sunshine law. There's insider dealing when it comes to multi-million-dollar tax break deals and issues with tax assessment and other favors given out, no bid contracts, and yet the church is silent. Well, I can tell you this, as pastor of Doulos Chapel, I'm not silent, and I've not been silent even before I was a pastor. As I told you when I operated the Urban League. When I was with the NAACP, I filed a lawsuit to address the gerrymandering, and because of my lawsuit back in 1992, the city council changed its face from 6 to 9 that you have now. I walk it like I talk it. All I'm asking, that was not as a Christian. Now, as a Christian pastor for 11 years, I've stood walking in the image and the character of Christ, demanding justice for people who don't have a voice. Will you join me? Will your church join me? Will your pastor stand? If so, stand with Stephanie. Get justice for Jihad, her son, who was hung by the Klan. That's outrageous. People are outraged about things that happen outside of the city, but they can't open their mouth to support Stephanie. You know, as a Christian, you will be judged by the Lord based on your willingness to provide justice. That's all I have. God bless you. Thank you for tuning in.
He said he asked the Lord, why is the devil doing all this stuff? You done already bound him, bound principalities and spoiled them. But he done broke out. And we got to get him back under our feet. We got to become a lot bolder than we've ever imagined.